Michael Clark Duncan would have made sense.
Yes, would have been great. Yeah.
Or Big D.
Yes.
Tall,
I would have made it
huge
scary.
hands.
I would have made it scary, definitely. Because
These kind of shapes.
yes,
you know?
could happen.
Especially 9 beers in. It would have
start
totally
petting
been
your
good.
hair, snap, boom, the neck goes. It's believable.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Shat The Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, and this is the podcast for you, I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my co-hosts, Ash Beans with Ketchup Milton.
Hi, y'all.
And Big D Dick Ebert.
Boa noite.
And each week we take a look back in time to decide if our favorite films still hold up. The movies we cover are chosen by you, the listeners, who generously commission the films you love. If you'd like to see all the movies we have covered, will cover, or want to choose one for yourself, please visit shatthemovies.com and have a look. At the end of each podcast, we'll provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie take to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button and share with a friend. That's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, if you like TV, subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Lovecraft Country, Game of Thrones, True Detective, and Watchmen. You can find all that information and past episodes at shatontv.com. And finally, if you'd like to hang out with us live all week long, follow and subscribe to our Twitch channel, shatthemovies.com/Twitch. We've been dormant through the summer a bit as we go out and live life and enjoy our families and take some time off, but we are going to get it back in gear. I am actually planning on starting a series of interviews with Shat co-hosts, starting with the King Bee, who wants to tell us all about his life. So it's going to be something, I don't know, Shat Your Life. But in addition to that, we do play video games and host watch parties at shatthemovies.com/Twitch. All that being said, Big D, what movie are we reviewing today?
So, Gene, this week, two of our commissioning legends, John and Adam R., who have commissioned, I can't even count the movies they've done. Recently, we just did The Great Outdoors for all three brothers, Adam, Josh, and John. This time, they wanted to do a literature challenge. So each one of them commissioned a book-to-movie adaptation, and that's why this week's Shat on Literature will cover the 1992 American period drama film based on John Steinbeck's novel of the same name, Of Mice and Men.
Well, and our first literary commissioner wrote in and said, Dear Shat, thanks again for taking another commission. For this round, it's a face-off. My favorite book adaptation versus Josh's. I discovered Of Mice and Men in the 6th grade. It's hard to say if it was my favorite book, but it's definitely the one that stuck with me all these years, and the one I've read the most. When I found out a movie had been made about it, I was excited, and then even more pleasantly surprised that it was largely faithful to the text itself. Now, as a movie, I can understand how some of it could seem sparse or even boring, especially for people who haven't read the book. But for me, though, it was a near perfect adaptation. Beautifully shot and acted, it cares less about making a story and more about just making it through, together if possible. In a way, it's arid, much like the text itself and the California setting in which it takes place. Sinise is great in his representation of George, and a large part of the movie rises or falls with John Malkovich's representation of Lennie, which he pulls off masterfully. So have at it. Thanks again. And always remember the rabbits, Adam. And P.S., in case you need some padding for who wins the bet, remember that my pick is a superior adaptation of a superior book by a superior author. Really? Tom Cruise is a vampire? That movie is for people who wanted Twilight but had graduated high school. Overdramatic, ill-paced, drivel.
Wow.
Adam, I was going to hold back on this, but calling Interview the Vampire overdramatic, ill-paced drivel, I got to tell you, you and your brother, it's like you were having a cook-off, right? And he showed up with like a full crawfish boil. No, fuck it, make it a seafood boil. There's even some lobster in there. He's serving it paired with like a perfect wine, maybe even delicious dessert. And you showed up with fucking Uncrustables, buddy. This is going to be a good one.
And
definitely.
We're going to address this in a couple of weeks, but Twilight does not deserve to be mentioned in like the realm of Anne Rice's vampires. Adam, 2 of your 3 people on here would be vampires if the world would let us. So, real excited to do your movie tonight, bud. Super excited.
Hold on. Why are you guys even shifting to the vampire? Stick to the fact that he said, Malkovich, this is a good performance, that it rises on his shoulders. Fuck the vampires. We're talking about this movie.
Yeah, Adam, we've been doing this for over 200 episodes, and we are pros at this, I think, to the extent that we can reserve our commentary from we actually start the review.
Yes.
Here, we're chomping at the bit, man. Like, we are ready to just cut into this motherfucker. This is going to be great.
Let's do it.
Well, Of Mice and Men is a 1992 American period drama. I think we're being trolled.
Yeah.
American period drama film based on John Steinbeck's 1937 novella of the same name. Directed and produced by Gary Sinise, the film features Gary Sinise as George Milton, alongside John Malkovich as Lennie Small, John Terry as Slim, Ray Watson as Candy, Joe Morton as Crooks, and Sherilyn Fenn as Curly's wife. Horton Foote adapted the story for film. Its plot centers on George and the intellectually disabled Lennie, two farm workers who travel together and dream of one day owning their own land. The film explores themes of discrimination, loneliness, and the American dream. Of Mice and Men took part in the 1992 Cannes Film Festival, where Sinise was nominated for the Palme d'Or, given to the director of the Best Featured Film. After the film debuted in the United States on October 2nd, 1992, it received acclaim from critics. So Big D, Ash, we always ask about your memories of the movie we're reviewing. I'm a big Steinbeck fan. I love him in general. Cannery Row has prime real estate on my elite bookshelf. Y'all know, like, the top bookshelf that you have, the one that you want on display, that you want everyone to see, where you want all your favorite books handy. It's right up there in the top shelf. And Grapes of Wrath was the first movie I saw in school that had me absolutely spellbound, like something we watched for literature class. And I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. I've never seen a film adaptation of Mice and Men, though, even though it's one of my favorite stage plays. Specifically because it requires so few actors and very subtle performances and minimal stage design to pack huge emotional impact. I think it's one of the tidiest, most clever plays I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love Steinbeck, right? Like, I mean, he's an absolutely brilliant author. I love everything I've ever read by him. I think his prose is beautiful, and I think the way that he crafts characters, it lends itself so tidily to a play, exactly like what you're talking about. You know, there are these beautiful kind of experiments in characterization, and he's classic because of that. And I think that Of Mice and Men, I mean, it's you know, not an unpopular opinion or a unique one, that it's one of his best, if not the best, next to The Grapes of Wrath. And I had never seen the movie version. I'll be very honest, I didn't even know there was a movie version until this got commissioned. And I was like, oh, well, it can't be like the Steinbeck Of Mice and Men, but it was. So I was excited going in because I love the source material. I love Gary Sinise. And unfortunately, I really up to this point love John Malkovich as well.
So this is why you need me on the podcast. I'm going to come into this as the everyman, unsophisticated. I barely read any books. So no, I'm saying it balances out. Gene's shrugging his shoulders. I'm saying, like, because a lot of our audience, I assume, doesn't read. There's some that read quite a lot. You two are avid readers. I'm on the other end of the spectrum. And in last week's review, I said at the end that I remember reading this in high school. I was completely wrong. So I started off, yes, I read it in high school, but I kept thinking, you know, the phrase, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. That is not Steinbeck. That is actually the Scottish poet Robert Burns. So as the movie goes on, I'm like, wow, okay, when am I going to get that line? It never comes. So I was coming into this already off base. I was in Brazil. I had just traveled like 5,000 miles. I sat down and it took a 12-pack of Brazilian's finest Kaiser for me to get through this film.
Big D, I was on vacation in Michigan when you started watching it, and I had just watched it the day before. And I love it because there's like sun streaming in through the window. Big D posts his photo on Twitter. The sun's streaming in through the window. He's got an ice cold beer, and I can see on the screen, it's the opening scene where the lady in the red dress is running across the field in Of Mice and Men. And I was like, you're going to need to switch to whiskey because shit's going to get dark real quick.
Real quick.
All right, Big D, let's crack open a cold one and dig into Of Mice and Men.
Tell me like he done before about them other guys and about us.
Guys like us, they don't got nobody in the world gives a hoot and hell about it.
But not us, Stuart. Tell about us now. Because
I got you.
And I got you.
I spend all my time telling you things and you forget them.
I remember about the rabbits. If I get in any trouble, I don't get to tend them rabbits.
You're nuts.
Don't you even look at her. Keep away from her.
I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But he's a damn good worker.
He's not much of a talker, is he?
Suppose he don't want to talk.
What the hell are you getting into this for?
We travel together.
You said I was your cousin.
Well, that was a lie. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself.
In a world where every man was alone, they had each other. In a time of darkness,
Lenny, I told you not to bring that pup in here.
I ain't got no pup.
they had laughter. In a land that had lost its hope,
I wish somebody'd shoot me when I ain't no good. But they won't do that. They'll can me.
they had a dream.
We gonna live off the fat of the land and have rabbits.
Then you could feed him alfalfa.
You damn right.
Written for the screen by Academy Award winner Horton Foote, from one of America's greatest novels.
What the hell you laughing about? You! Get him, Lenny!
John Malkovich, Gary Sinise, John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, directed by Gary Sinise.
During the Great Depression, George Milton and his intellectually disabled companion Lennie Small flee their workplace after Lennie is accused of attempted rape. While walking, George catches Lennie petting a dead mouse that he had accidentally killed. George forcibly takes the mouse and throws it away. Camping before reaching their next job, Lennie asks George to tell him again about their dream, and George describes how the two will one day have their own piece of land and how Lennie will tend their rabbits. He adds that if Lennie should ever get in trouble, he is to return to the campsite and wait for George. So this opening scene had me somewhat hopeful as we were watching the movie. The movie's good at foreshadowing. Like within the first few minutes, you get the sense that things are going to end horribly. And I was watching this in Michigan with Sarah, and she just went to sleep because as soon as I got near the ranch, she's like, I can tell this is going to get really upsetting and never get better. And she just knocked out. But to me, this is the sort of movie I can't turn off. If it's foreshadowed early on that something horrible is going to happen to the people I care about, like I'm down. It reminds me of Dogville, right? With Nicole Kidman. Like you just know things are not going to end well. And you start feeling sicker and sicker as you're watching it, but you can't shut it off.
Yeah, so I think everybody knows that basically the end of the movie, something horrible does go wrong with Lennie and a woman. So this opening scene, I'm thinking, okay, we're seeing the end of the movie. This is how it's going to conclude. Nuh-uh, this isn't the first woman that Lennie's gotten handsy with. Lennie and George, they're running, and I'm like, shit, how many times has George covered for Lennie? And then he keeps making it worse. He keeps enabling him. He's just carrying around a dead mouse. He finds it. He's just gotten handsy with this woman in her dress, and he promises to get him a puppy. This is within the first 5 minutes. I think that maybe George is the one with the problem, and he's using Lennie as an instrument to inflict pain. He's the sadist.
I think you're creating like a whole other story that doesn't actually exist because you're completely misunderstanding George. I mean, he's a character that Steinbeck intends us to see ourselves through. So I guess if you're a sadist, George could be a sadist. But if you're not one, then he's
Busted.
not a sadist. He's central to the theme of this book and of the film, which we'll get to later, but he doesn't enable Lennie in the way that you mean. I think that he enables Lennie, and we see it here, like to actually be able to have a life. Like he's the only reason Lennie is able to navigate the world and isn't in some asylum somewhere as he would be in this time period. But at the same time, George is like super resentful for the toll that it takes on him because he's your classic caretaker. And I don't know if either of you have ever had to take care of a loved one, but as much as you love that loved one, like you find yourself like really resenting sometimes the fact that they need you so much. And there's like this really beautiful honesty in that. And I think that Gary Sinise did a very good job at the start of this movie in showing that complexity of like, he loves Lennie, but like, he's also a huge burden to him.
I mean, it's clearly a Gary Sinise passion project. It's like written by Gary Sinise, directed by Gary Sinise.
Yeah.
Gary Sinise did all the cinematography. He also did the catering. I mean, like, he gets this character. I think he did George really, really well. Lennie, on the other hand, and I can't believe I'm going to be critical of a John Malkovich performance because I never have been and I never thought I ever would. But if you guys remember when we did The Seventh Sign and they cast John Taylor, and I praised it for them actually using a person with Down syndrome to represent the character, I'm going to do the opposite here. In all the stage performances of Mice and Men I've ever seen, I've never seen anything this cringe by any actor. Yeah. Malkovich misses the mark in an almost offensive way. It's like watching a great actor parody what a terrible actor would do to play an intellectually disabled person. And the things he does to seem childlike just come off as creepy. And then the efforts that they took to make him look big, because Lennie's supposed to be a really big guy, just made him look ridiculous. None of this works.
It's like a parody. I had to keep reminding myself, this is John Malkovich. This is Gary Sinise. 3 Oscar nominations between them. It feels like an SNL skit. And it popped into my head. It could be maybe at this point, I was averaging a beer every 5 minutes. So I was maybe 3 beers in, and my brain made the connection. I said, this is Ben Stiller in Tropic Thunder. This is Simple Jack. And I'm like, it can't be. So I'm like, let's do some research. This is actually what the case is. There was an interview with Ben Stiller where he said the Simple Jack trailer that we shot featuring Mickey Rooney is awesome. He laughs and he says he plays like this angry farm owner that's made because Jack accidentally kills one of his rabbits. It's like a very sort of Mice and Men inspired vibe. So in this way, John Malkovich did go full Simple Jack. And the way this movie's done, Tropic Thunder starts out with 3 trailers, famously. There was a Poppin' Booty or whatever. There was like a Poppin' Booty power drink. Then there was the one for Ben Stiller where he was a superhero and he was fighting ice, and it was like Part 5. The other one was called Satan's Alley. And it was Tobey Maguire and Robert Downey Jr. playing like monks in this like 16th century, whatever, monastery. Yes, and they're like hitting on each other and whatever. This movie felt like the real version of that film. It felt like a really bad joke that should have been in the beginning of a comedy.
I just appreciate that we have a podcast now where Big D says "poppin' booty," because that was pretty great. It's a pretty good video too. But I don't know. The other thing about it too is you talked about Gene, like how he's so big, right? Or like trying to make him look big, and he's just not. Like John Malkovich is like tall and skinny, and in the book he's supposed to be so big that Steinbeck describes him as shapeless because he's so large. And for me, I've always considered like Michael Clark Duncan's performance in The Green Mile and his build, like that's Lennie, right? He's simple minded, and that's the words they use in that movie, not me using, but he does it with a subtlety about it, and it's just spot on. And he's so big and lumbering. And this, you're supposed to believe that if he pets a woman's hair, he's gonna hurt her. Like John Malkovich, like he weighs like $160.
I want to point out before we go any further in this pod too, that if any impersonations of Lennie happen on the pod, we're making fun of John Malkovich's performance. It's not us making fun of people with intellectual disabilities or Lennie the character. But I just have a gut feeling that at some point it's going to happen, and we're making fun of Malkovich, the actor's performance.
Oh, 100%. And if you want to go check out my Twitter account, because there's a scene where Curly's wife walks into the bunkhouse and the camera pans quickly. And John Malkovich is standing in the corner and he's doing these little motions in his face. He does it repeatedly. It's the worst performance ever. And this movie fits into a category that we've become too familiar with recently. Oscar bait films. Films that are released at the end of the year, right within the window of Oscar-nominated films to become eligible. They normally have like a couple famous actors. It's going to be some period piece. And this movie is exactly what it is. I always think of like The Soloist, where you had Robert Downey Jr. plays like a reporter, and you had Jamie Foxx as a disabled celloist. That's the type of movie this felt like it was trying to be. Gary Sinise came in and said he was going to direct this film. It was a project that he loved. Do you know what his third directing film was? Any ideas?
He didn't have one?
He never directed again after this.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't go over too well for this movie.
Yeah, and predictably, Big D, critics did love it. And that's the thing that surprised me the most about this movie is I thought for sure people would go see this and go, oh, whatever you guys were trying to do, it didn't work. But there was like this string of movies in the 90s, I remember, that capitalized on using people with intellectual disabilities as powerful characters. Like if you wanted a shot at the Oscars, that's what you had to do in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the 90s were a time of intellectual disability. Like, hello, what's eating Gilbert Grape, right? Like, that is Leonardo DiCaprio trying to win himself an Oscar. And that happened over and over again in the 90s. And then the early 2000s, it was all women playing ugly people, like Charlize Theron and Monster.
Still hot.
And I don't know, like, I feel like that's something we don't do anymore. Like, that isn't something that would be, like, okay today. But it started with Rain Man, and it just kept going from there.
And I need to reemphasize, even though I already said it once in the podcast, just for people who are like banging their heads against their dashboards in the car, we understand that Lennie is written that way as a character. I think my point, and Ash's certainly, is that I've seen this on stage before and I've read the book. He went a whole different direction with this thing that is like,
Totally.
that is not the Lennie from the text.
He went full simple Jack. That's the simple thing to remember. He went full R. He went full Lennie.
R is
he
for
went rogue.
Restraint.
Oh,
Rogue.
he went wild. He went straight rogue.
The following day, the two arrive to work at Tyler Ranch. The ranch boss becomes suspicious of Lennie's mental condition when Lennie talks, forgetting to keep silent as George had instructed him. In order to not be fired, George lies to the boss, telling him Lennie is his cousin and that he was kicked in the head by a horse when he was a child. At the bunkhouse, George and Lennie befriend an aged ranch hand, Candy, and take an instant dislike to the boss's son, Curly. They also meet Slim, who leads their work team. Lennie is instantly attracted to Curly's seductive wife, who comes into the bunkhouse to flirt with George. George strictly instructs Lennie to keep away and not look at her.
So I know we're talking about how much of a failure Lennie was, and he was. Like, this movie, I don't think can ever recover from how bad John Malkovich's performance. Like our commissioner said, it hangs on it either succeeding because of him or failing because of him, and he just isn't successful. One thing, though, that Sinise does really well is that in the script, they at least keep this really important part of Mice and Men, which are these classic character types. Like, if we had all of the Shat community in front of us and we said, raise your hand if you read of Mice and Men in school, most people would be raising their hand because this is one of like 5 books that's taught across the country.
Big D be like, the Robert Burns poem?
Yeah. The Scottish guy. But most people, at least post 1980, like this became a huge part of that quote unquote canon of books that are taught to middle schoolers. And there's a reason why. It's because it's a very easy way to introduce kids into how to read different characterizations that happen over and over again. If Roger were here, the tropes that he would refer to, right? And Gary Sinise does a really good job of doing that here. You've got George, who's your really complicated protagonist. You've got Lennie, who's this incredibly, not as Malkovich plays him, but as he's intended to be, this contradiction of strength and vulnerability. And I think there's this really cool thing that Sinise does at least capture where he plays with this idea of loyalty, where like, you know, George is his master. And in a way, he's like the dog that Lennie later gets. He has no idea why he's loyal to George, the same way like June, your dog Jean, has no idea why she's loyal to you. So when they do things that appear disloyal on their face, like shitting in your shoe or eating your couch cushions, they don't realize they're being disloyal because they don't understand the concept of that. And so it's this really beautiful parallel. And as we're introduced in this section of the movie to Curly's wife, she's your classic female Eve character, right? She's a woman that tempts men, and she eventually ends their ultimate dreams of an Eden, here a farm with a copious amount of rabbits. And it's really, really well done. And I know that Malkovich is not perfect, but the intent at least is there. And so I want to at least recognize that because Sinise tried really hard. It's just Malkovich shit the bed.
And Adam, we get that a lot of people in this movie nailed their roles. Like, it's not a bad performance from everyone. And you mentioned Curly's wife, so played by Sherilyn Fenn. And, you know, she's supposed to be this seductive character, and that's the perfect way to describe her. She's this character who's so controlled by her man that she doesn't even get a name. She's just Curly's wife. And as I'm watching this, I could really believe how hard it would be to resist her and how badly she wanted to have control of anything in her life. That all came through in Sherilyn Fenn's performance. I thought she was fantastic.
At this point, I'm probably about 9 beers in. I got a good buzz going on, and I'm starting to think. I'm like, man, I know what Curly's wife is doing, but I think I would go over there onto the hay bale and I would check on her hurt foot. I would have to do it. She's seducing me with this performance. It might be because I was drunk, but I would have 100% fallen prey to this. I'm thinking, George, come on, go get over there quick, do it. Nobody will catch you. Only to momentarily later realize, boom, I'm glad I didn't do that because they came in the barn. I would have gotten caught. This is why drunk people don't make smart decisions, because sober, you run away, but drunk, Curly's wife made a compelling argument for me to cross over that line.
Well, and I think she did because they make some really good changes for her character as compared in the book. Because in the book, like she wears like tons of makeup. Like they talk about how she looks like a painted woman, like a whore. And she has these bright red lips and all this crazy rouge. And she wears these weird shoes. And I don't know. I appreciate the fact that she looked like an actual farmer's wife in this because she's beautiful on her own. And I think it's reasonable and just enough. So good job, Sinise. That's like your one win.
When a ranch hand named Carlson suggests they shoot Candy's old dog and get Slim to give him one of his pups, Lennie gets excited and asks George for a pup. Candy offers to pitch in with Lennie and George so they can buy their dream farm. And just as it seems as the dream is moving closer to reality, Curly accuses Slim of vying for his wife and spots Lennie laughing unintentionally. Curly attacks Lennie, yelling at him to fight back. Lennie grabs Curly's hand and crushes it in his iron grip. Slim gives Curly an ultimatum. If Curly tries to get George and Lennie fired, Slim will tell everyone how Curly's hand really got crushed, and everyone will laugh at him. Curly, concerned for his reputation, reluctantly agrees to keep quiet.
Okay, so much like Ashley a few weeks ago described our stuntman fiasco, I got to take my time and really delve into a scene here that I think is one of my most memorable through Shat The Movies. We finally get the altercation. We've seen that Curly's got a little bit of the Napoleon complex. He wants to fight everybody, but of course, anybody who's capable, he won't screw with. He now gets his chance with Lennie because Lennie, he said, was laughing at him. This fight is so bad. It is absolutely fantastic. It is the most ridiculous thing we have seen in a long time. And I think it's physically impossible. Gene, you're more the combat expert here. Can I take my hand, regardless of how strong I am, can I squeeze and crush your fist so that blood will gush out, much like you just stuck it in a jar full of jelly? Is that possible to do?
I mean, with enough pressure, yeah. I just don't know any human who has that kind of hand strength. But Lennie is supposed to be like a force of nature, right? He's superhuman. Like I think in the book they describe it as like having like bear paws, basically. Like they're not like human hands, or they're much bigger and more muscular.
But there's no violence in the scene, is what I'm saying. Like even with something ridiculous like Roadhouse, you know, where Dalton rips out Johnny's throat, there is that quick flash of violence. Here it's like a slow, I'm gonna crush your hand, and the music, it is so bad.
Yeah, but I think the only way it could be worse than Big D is if they actually choreographed a fight scene. Like, imagine John Malkovich in lifts and like a chubby suit doing a choreographed fight scene with Curly. It's not going to work. This is the best. This is the best scenario possible.
Yes.
No, because you know who doesn't have bear-like hands? John Malkovich. It is the issue with his entire physical build. It would be like casting me in this movie and being like, hey, look, Ashley crushed a hand. No one would believe that. I think that John Steinbeck somewhere is rolling over in his grave, seeing John Malkovich play Lennie, because what sucks is you're supposed to feel so much in this moment. Like, this is such a dramatic part of the story, but instead you're just like, is that blood or is it ink? Because it looks like he had like a pen in his hand and like the pen exploded and that's what's going on. Like, I could have used like some crunching of some bones or like something like that, because it's like, is he holding his hand? Is he crushing his hand? It makes absolutely no sense.
You need him to be scary. You need to understand that there's a violent, raw nature to it. But the way they shoot it, it's so bad. Please, people, go watch it. It's so bad.
Michael Clark Duncan would have made sense.
Yes, would have been great. Yeah.
Or Big D.
Yes.
Tall,
made it
huge
scary.
hands.
I would have made it scary, definitely. Because
These kind of shapes.
yes, could happen.
Especially 9 beers in. It would have
start
totally
petting
been
your
good.
hair, snap, boom, the neck goes. It's believable.
Well, one weird thing the movie does too, and the book as well, I guess, is this like focus on hands. Now that I think about it, because you've got Curly with his Vaseline glove, which is fucking weird as shit, and then you've also got Lennie with his huge hands. But one of the things that threw me off about the movie is Candy is supposed to be missing a hand, and it's like the filmmakers forgot that, because I'm pretty sure in most of the scenes you see Ray Walston from like My Favorite Martian, he just got his like sweater sleeve just pulled over his fist.
It looks like he's cold.
Yeah, it looks like he was just cold the whole time. And then I had to actually remind myself, like, oh yeah, his hand's supposed to be gone. Like they just didn't want to spare the effects, I guess. Still, even with the fucked up weird hand thing, Ray Walston, I'm gonna call it right here, best actor on set. I like really felt bad for Candy and his dog, and it was really the closest the movie got to expressing the novel's intent and its symbolism. Like that alone kind of broke my heart a little bit. And then Malkovich was there to just snap me right back to reality.
Yeah, and I don't want people to think we're just shitting on this movie just to shit on it. The performances outside of Malkovich and Sinise, there are some good ones. Candy was great. Walston was great. But I also remember some of our actors that we've come across in Shat The Movies. You had Noble Willingham, who plays the boss. We did his movie in The Last Boy Scout where he played the bad guy, Sheldon Marcone. He gives an honest effort. He puts in a believable, even though he's only on screen a couple minutes, he's not mailing it in. Then you get John Terry, who plays Slim. He was Lieutenant Lockhart in Full Metal Jacket, which is coming up soon. Some of the other actors, they actually knew what the material was and knew where to draw the line. It's so hard to even think. Sinise and Malkovich are like the worst part of the film.
Well, I think Sinise is okay. I think he does a pretty good George, but there are a couple scenes that work really well too. As much as the fist crush fails miserably, when they start talking about the farm and they get so excited, like I found myself like really moved because it was precious. You see this glimmer of hope in an otherwise just like dry, desolate existence, right? And I think that it was such a nice moment, and that's the closest I felt like in that scene that they got to the source material, was seeing that glimmer of hope that's immediately dashed, because it's not that kind of story, right? Like Sarah was completely correct that things are going to get bad and they're going to stay that way. But for that one moment, it really worked, and I could see what they were intending and the possibility of it, and it's just a bummer that it didn't, work out.
In addition to that, there was also this ambiguity and like another layer of depth to the hopelessness, where I was led to believe that the movie was telling us that Dream Farm isn't a real place. Like there is no older couple looking to sell for $600, and George is weaving this tale for Lennie and Curly, and it makes the whole thing like so much sadder. And Gary Sinise, like he sells it, and he also seems to be gradually slipping from his responsibility as the weight bears down on him. As you mentioned earlier, kind of like being that caretaker, and you sense that like he's getting increasingly careless as he starts to fit in with the other guys. And again, I have no qualms with his performance. I thought it was great. Lennie's my only issue here.
Dude, I hadn't even considered that. And I think that adds another layer to it. And I think it's real. I think people do that. That there's the scene because Candy wants George to send in the money. And George says, no, let's hold on to it. I thought maybe he was just being cautious. But you're right. I think he's admitting to us that the dream isn't real. I think this is something that a lot of people do. Now my mother, she had like let's just say a mobility issue where she got hurt a couple of years ago. So she was supposed to do physical therapy. She was supposed to walk to get her mobility better. She never did that. So she still, to this day, she will talk about this trip. She's going to go to Alaska and she's going to walk the trails. And my sister and I look at each other like, shit, well, that's not going to happen. After this scene, I realized that maybe my mother knows it too. But it's the idea of the trail and the hike and going to Alaska, even though she knows she'll never get there without that little glimmer of the farm, that dream. Even though it's not real, we need to hold that to keep us going. And I think that added something to this scene that really I had missed. So I think it was a good catch.
I can just see Adam getting his hopes up right now. He's like, they get it. It's connecting with them on a personal level.
But then.
While the other ranch hands are partying in town, Lennie and Crooks talk about being lonely until George returns and finds them. Later, during a horseshoes tournament, Lennie realizes he has accidentally killed his puppy and is greatly upset. Curly's wife enters and tries to speak to him, admitting she is lonely. After finding out about Lennie's love of petting soft things, she lets him stroke her hair, but she soon complains and screams because he is pulling too hard. Lennie tries to keep her quiet, but accidentally breaks her neck in the process. Realizing he's in trouble, he runs to the brush as George told him to do.
So realizing that I had not remembered the book very well, I went back and did a quick, Cliff Notes refresh. So I have a basic outline in my head. I remembered parts of the book, and the book and the movie do differ. So we get into a part here where George decides he's going to go off into town. He wants to get laid. He's been talking about the horror house. He's going to leave Lennie behind. This is right after the hand crushing incident. Again, not smart. In the book, Curly's wife is the one who goes into Crook's room and actually threatens to have him lynched. Now, Crook is the disabled, I think he tends the horses. He's a ranch hand like they are.
Also kicked by a horse.
Yes. Who was injured. So they call him Crooks because he can't stand up straight. So we get now Sinise obviously wanted to change this. So we're going to have our Oscar moment here, right? So we're going to make Lennie, simple Lennie, who doesn't see race. He's going to make a black friend. So they manipulate this scene. Again, I think it's with Oscars in mind. Lennie comes in. His simple nature lets him just see beyond racial discrimination. Why can't you come in the bunkhouse, Crook? Why can't you play cards with us? And Joe Morton does this performance that made me think we were watching Fletch Lives with Cleavon Little's portrayal of calculus. I have expected Crooks to kind of come up to Lennie. Lennie gives him like a big, freakishly strong hug, pops his back, and he goes, "Oh, Lordy, I can walk again." That's how stereotypical this scene was and how heavy-handed it felt.
Yeah, I understand the theme of being othered is important throughout this tale, but maybe we didn't need this horribly executed scene that betrays the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was screaming at the TV. I watched this with Tom, and Tom didn't remember the book, and he's like, "Why are you so upset?" Because it's fucking ridiculous. Because cutting the fact that Curly's wife is this horrible racist removes like the entire weight of her character arc, because you're supposed to see humanity in everyone. That's what Steinbeck wants in this novel. You're supposed to see humanity even at people who are totally evil at their core. And so stripping her of the threat of lynching, fuck you, Gary Sinise.
So Ash, I didn't know that until now, that Steinbeck wanted us to see some humanity in the characters. I found myself actually feeling like I didn't understand her. There's an honesty in the conversation she has with Lennie, where she's sitting down and she's opening up to him, and she's talking about the time that like a performing troupe came to town, and somebody tricked her into sleeping with them, saying they'd, get her a role and take her out to Hollywood. She in that moment is not trying to seduce Lennie. She's just sitting and talking to him. And she says, "I've never told anybody this." I got a feeling from the film version that she was actually making a connection, and that I felt sympathy for her, that maybe all along we had been misunderstanding that she was trying to seduce everyone, whereas she was just this manipulated, controlled woman alone on a farm who was living a life she didn't want.
Yeah, I mean, clearly her life sucks. It's still a lot better than everyone else's life, but it sucks. This goes back to her not having a name, though, right? Is that even though her living conditions are better than everyone else on the farm, it doesn't mean that her life is better than theirs. I just find it so hard to be sympathetic when she knows she's endangering people. And again, I think that they need to play up both sides of her character, where she's awful, 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 but also even she has some problems.
Yeah, and I mean, when she dies in the book, like Steinbeck talks about how her makeup makes her seem alive, and her mouth is all agape and fear, and the curls fall around her head like a baby doll. And it's almost like he like paints her as finding innocence through this like wrongful death. And so she's this awful woman, but we feel for her, and that she acts awful in life, but a lot of it was really out of her control because of what Curly turns her into. And the death of her is the death of this dream on the farm. And again, it's supposed to be like super powerful, but it is completely neutered in every way possible. The way that Gary Sinise handles it here, even her scream and the way it's shot with him like breaking her neck, it's as ridiculous as the hand crush. Like, it just physiologically does not make any sense for her to die in this way.
So I think Gary Sinise's lack of experience as a director plays directly into the scene, Ash. It's laughable. It's heavy-handed. It's over the top. It's going to be his like bow on his Oscar-nominated film. We now see the scene from above, okay? Lennie's kind of hunching over Curly's wife's dead body. He's sobbing, and he's, again, terrible. I've done a bad thing. I've done a really bad thing. And he's talking about, obviously, killing her, not his performance. There's a single pigeon that startles, and it takes flight through the barn, and it flies through the rafters, and the camera shoots down from above. And I could picture Gary Sinise being like, the pigeon is her spirit ascending to heaven. It was so shockingly bad.
I'm just shocked it wasn't in like super slow-mo, because this is also the era of super slow-mo. That would have just cinched it for me. Well, Candy finds Curly's wife dead and informs George, and the two realize their dream will never happen. Curly leads a mob which chases after Lennie, intending to lynch him. George finds Lennie first, and wanting to spare him a violent and painful death at the hands of the mob, calms Lennie by retelling their dream. As George gets to the part where Lennie gets to tend the rabbits, he shoots Lennie in the back of the head. The scene then returns to George in the boxcar, heading south, remembering their old dream and his memories of Lennie. Now, this is weird to say, but Of Mice and Men may have suffered from too big a cast and too much set. Adam mentioned how it's sort of a sparse tale, and I agree. And this might have been a misstep on Sinise's part, because seeing the ranch, seeing the guys playing horseshoes, the montages of everybody like, hey, we're having fun bucking barley, the music and all the add-on options the film gives you, it took away from the simplicity of this tale. It's like trying to hear a guy whistle in the middle of an orchestra. I respect that Gary Sinise clearly loves this movie and this is his passion project, but maybe it just isn't supposed to be a movie.
I think that's absolutely brilliant, because I hadn't thought about that. I think that an adaptation of a book like this is meant to be a play, because when you see a play, you're forced to focus on the drama and the dialogue and the characters. And it's something like trying to make like Chekhov's seagull into a movie. And I saw that on Broadway in 2008 with Carey Mulligan, and it was amazing because these horrors and the drama are like contained and in your face. It's the same thing. My favorite play of all time is Equus, and you feel claustrophobic in the theater because you're forced to deal with these huge emotions and the sadness that's coming at you from every angle. You can't escape it, and you need that in a story like this. And you get it when you read the book because you're alone in the world with it, and you feel the loneliness of the characters because you're alone reading it. And in this movie, the farm and the world, it's so big that it like dulls the effect that you're supposed to have on watching and like consuming the horrors that are on screen in front of you, because it's just too pretty. And with that in mind, I think that the greatest travesty of this movie is that the entire theme of the film is lost. I mentioned it before that Steinbeck wanted us to find humanity, and really he wanted to teach us that if you try to understand your fellow man, then you're going to be kind, because nobody's perfect and everybody's going through shit, especially in this time period in which he's writing. Like, the world sucks. I know we talk about how 2020 and 2021 are hard, but like we have like fucking amazing lives compared to what it was like growing up and living this kind of life in the Great Depression. And there's so much loneliness in this book, and it's about breaking the cycle of that loneliness and giving us this connection, but we prevent it by not just getting each other. And none of that is in this movie. It's just the story of a man with an intellectual disability that has a caretaker that's resentful for taking care of him, and he kills him in the end, and in a way his life is better because of it. And like, that sucks, because that's just not what the story is. And I'm sure we'll get write-ins like, Ashley just doesn't get this movie because she didn't see it in 1992 and it's really powerful. But it's fucking not at all.
Okay, so at this point, I'm closing out the 12-pack. I need some clarity here, okay? Because in my blurry memory at this point in the movie, It seemed like he was pretty quick at killing him. I thought there was going to be, hey, George, just sit there, and you're going to see him kind of struggle with the decision. In my drunken haze, it seemed like he was like, hey, just look over in the other, boom. Like there was no pause, nothing.
In the play at this moment, it's like shock. Everyone's just like, because it's coming, but it happens so suddenly. And I think that they got that part across okay. But I got to tell you, when I read this and when I've seen it performed on stage, this moment, I'm sobbing. And the movie, I was just like, oh, thank God it's over. I think what Ash said is absolutely right, where we get the plot, we get emotional performances from the cast, and we get symbolism that is borrowed directly from the novella. But what's missing is meaning. Meaning is the component that's missing, and it just makes it an inferior film.
Totally agree.
Well, now's the time when we give our Shat score for Of Mice and Men. The Shat score is our way of telling you how many wipes this movie takes to get off your respective butts. 0 wipes is a perfect movie. It's bucking barley with the boys, using your big man muscles, being faster than everybody else. 5 wipes is a dead puppy. We'll start with you, Ash. How many wipes did you give Of Mice and Men?
Well, you can't expect an English professor to not go a little shot on literature. And that's what I'm going to do in my wipe square, because I'm conflicted here because I adore the book, but the movie wasn't great. So I just want to say this and to think about this. So the title is Big D, as you said. It comes from the Robert Burns' poem To a Mouse. And if you've not read it before, it's a poem that tells the story of somebody who really regrets destroying a mouse's nest. And the reason why is because that mouse it's vulnerable. And now it's made more so because this person has taken away his home. And so like that mouse that in the poem couldn't protect itself against destruction, or the mouse that's dead in Lennie's pocket couldn't protect itself against dying, George couldn't protect Lennie from his eventual destruction. And most likely, if we followed and there was like a sequel, George isn't going to be able to prevent his own destruction either. And I think that Sinise tries really hard to sell this. And as we've talked, in parts he succeeds. But with Malkovich just bumbling around and looking ridiculous, and with him changing some of these key moments of the book that really are like turnkey moments, the movie winds up just falling really flat. And the sad thing is that unlike our characters that Steinbeck gives us, Sinise could have prevented the destruction of one of truly the greatest literary pieces of all time. It was in his hands. He had the formula. He had the love for his source material, but like Lennie in the book, his big bear claw crushed the hand and it sucked. And so because of that, I'm giving it 3 wipes.
In my opinion, this movie commits the biggest sin of all possible things in movies. It's a waste of potential. You had everything. You had a great cast. The production value is fantastic. It's beautiful. The set, the costumes, everything, the period looks appropriate. It's a quality film, but they miss those key moments, like you said, of the connection, of what's the message. It's so close. It was there. And that just gets me upset. I found myself laughing out loud when I obviously shouldn't have, when they're crushing like a can of jam inside that glove and he's crushing his hand, or Curly's wife is complaining about the heat for the 80th time. I couldn't sit there and watch it with a straight face as Malkovich is kind of shambling around trying to look like this giant man-child. It was just so bad. And I could not have watched this sober, so I give you 2 credit. I don't know how much you were drinking. I give credit to Sarah for noping out early on and going to sleep. Probably the smartest thing she could have done. But I'm glad that we did it. And I'm glad. How the hell did all the critics? How is this a 97% fresh Rotten Tomatoes with the critics? How's that possible? It's a 3.5 wipe movie. And I'm being kind. That's only because of production value, Candy, and a few other members, but it's bad.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Big D. I know it's silly to knock a movie down a whole wipe just because of 1 star, but John Malkovich was the absolute wrong choice for a movie that really didn't need to be made. So you're both right in that regard. The rest of the cast is pretty good, including Walrus Mustache Guard from The Fugitive. I just rather watch video of Mice and Men, the play, than this cinematic letdown. And again, like you said, more resources should produce a better work of art, not an inferior work of art. So for me, I'm with Ash here at 3 wipes. So my 3 wipes, Ash's 3 wipes, and your 3.5 wipes, Big D, give us an average wipe score of 3.16 repeating wipes for Of Mice and Men.
So, Gene, in the opening salvo in the literature war in Shat The Movies history, with a score of 3.166 repeating wipes, that now puts Of Mice and Men in the 165 spot. It is tied with 16 Candles, Vision Quest, Strange Days, Spies Like Us, Escape from New York, The Last Boy Scout, and Armageddon.
Oh, God. It's as bad as Armageddon. I mean, Ben Affleck with Animal Cracker seduction scene is just as bad as this.
Yeah, it's as bad as Vision Quest.
I'd rather get drunk and watch Armageddon than get drunk and watch this.
Well, yeah, because this is Steinbeck and Great Depression-y. But I don't know. Ben Affleck didn't have his teeth fixed yet. He was kind of gross.
Well, thanks, Adam, for this great idea and commissioning Of Mice and Men. Big D, do we have any voicemail or email?
Gene, so this week, I just want to take a moment. This is not a paid sponsorship. This is not anything that we as Shat The Movies are promoting. But when you run into good people, I like to share and promote whatever it is that they create. Creative people. I think we should support each other. When we were starting out with the podcast, there were people like Dana Buckler who helped us, and we help people along the way. And that's how you build a big family. So recently, my boss was leaving his position. And we wanted to do something special for him. He had previously worked with the boy bands, with NSYNC, Timberlake. So we wanted to do a musical parody song for his going away. So I went on to Fiverr, which is a place where you can, get people of different skills. You need a video edited. You need some audio processed. They will do things there. So for $15, I found a wonderful human being, Ricardo Blay Diaz. I will put a link in our notes here. If you want to do something special for a loved one, a family member, I did a special Mother's Day song a few years back, under $20, something special for a loved one, a coworker. This guy was great. He did something wonderful for me, and I wanted to promote him because, out there in a sea of people who are looking to get your services, good people I like to promote. So I'll put a link in it, but Ricardo did me solid and created a one-of-a-kind parody song to Bye 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 that we sent my boss off at an all staff. So I thank you very much. And if anybody out there needs a special song, hit Ricardo up. He's cool. So, Gene, next week we shift gears to a film that tells the tale of the Griswold family's cross-country drive to the Wally World theme park, proving to be much more arduous than they ever anticipated. This came out in 1983, and it is one of the most memorable movies of my childhood, and I'm excited to do this special commission for Tom from Crane, Texas.
Well, thank you to everyone who contributed to make Tom's dream possible. And thank you, Adam, for commissioning Of Mice and Men. That concludes this week's episode of Shat The Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat The Movies. You can email us, host@shatthemovies.com, or leave us a voicemail at 914-719-SHAT. If you did leave us some voicemail this week, we got those. We received them. We'll have them on some future episodes. You can support the podcast by shopping our Amazon affiliate link, completing our free anonymous survey to help attract advertisers, buying our merch, or commissioning your own movie. Find all that information by visiting our website, shatthemovies.com. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV. We review TV series such as Lovecraft Country, Westworld, True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. You can find all that information on our website, shatontv.com, wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a 5-star review that helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D and Ash, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for the following movie.
This summer, when you think vacation, think National Lampoon's Vacation. See the real America.
Hey, underpants. Hey, yellow.
It's friendly.
I'm okay.
Don't you want to look at the Grand Canyon?
It's educational.
Great.
And most of all, it's fun.
The dog went on the picnic basket.
Let Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo,
Mark.
Imogene Coca, Randy Quaid, John Candy, and Christy Brinkley.
Well, are you gonna go for it?
This is crazy. This is crazy. This is crazy.
Take you for a ride. This summer, when you think vacation, think National Lampoon's Vacation.
Better check under the hood.
Do you know the celloist, right?
No,
It's the cellist.
That
It's
threw
not
me
the
the way off the
celloist.
soloist.
It's called the soloist.
They call it the soloist.
Right, but it's not the cello.
Did I call it the celloist?
Yes, you called it the celloist. He's a soloist, but he is a cellist.
Okay.